together really well. They've come through having difficult conversations and managing each other and managing processes without ever even seeing each other in most cases. And I think that that's an amazing feat. We've had young people, I think the one big plus about this process being online and virtual is I think we've had young people from such different parts of the country participate in this process, from parts of the country where they likely would not have been able to participate if it was a in-person workshop that was hosted in one of the big metropoles. And so there's been disadvantages to online, but there certainly have been advantages. And I want to commend SAIA for being so open to having a flexible process, open to having a process that has valued the young people. Every young person who participated in the writing process was compensated for their efforts and their work. And I think that's an amazing standard. And every young person who needed data was provided data for this project. And I think both of those things set a high bar for youth participation on the continent, set a high bar for the fact that if we want young people's voices in the room, we must be willing to put in the effort, the resources, and value them. And so we're just so privileged that we are part of this. And to the young people, I hope that seeing that document, you see the fruits of your work and your labor. And we're looking forward to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve and Tessa. Before handing over to the next speaker, I'd like to just go through a few housekeeping rules. Just to ask everybody to please keep your mic on mute if you're not speaking or presenting, just so we're not distracting the person who is speaking. Please make use of the raise hand function during the interactive sessions and also the comments section. To please ask the speakers to keep to time, given that we really have a packed program. Maybe to go over time for 2 minutes is acceptable, but please try not to go over 5 minutes over the allocated time. We will be running a couple of polls and would appreciate your participation. Just to say that they are all anonymous, so please feel free to participate. And during the course of this workshop, we will have an M&E form. The link will be pasted on the chat function. Please do participate on that form just to let us know how you found the event and where you believe we should improve in future. And without wasting any further time, I'd like to call Dr. Patrick Sokela from the Department of Public Service and Administration to give his remarks. Dr. Sokela, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luanda. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we are able to hear you better now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just accept my apology. I'm not going to, switch on my camera because I have an unstable network on my side. So if that is okay with you.
Yes, please go ahead, Dr. Sokela.
Well, I would like to express my appreciation for the opportunity to share with you, where we are and in the context of the report that you are about to discuss today. We appreciate your effort. I've gone through the report and the recommendations. I see that it's still work in progress, but I think the substance of the report will be very helpful to the work of the second, generation country review process. So we do appreciate that, especially in the context of the labor force survey, the fourth quarter of 2020 results that were published by State South Africa yesterday. The question of youth unemployment is quite a difficult, challenging situation. We currently have an official unemployment rate of 32.5%. And that is a restricted definition, and the expanded definition is, according to yesterday's statistics, is 42.6. If you factor in the youth numbers, the situation is even worse than that. So the timing of your report and this discussion is coming at the right time for our effort. We do appreciate that. In the context of the work that we are doing, within the next 3 weeks, the National Governing Council will be meeting and they will be looking at the draft that the technical research institutions have compiled. And then we will be in a position to have a mandate to engage further with yourselves. So we're looking forward to further engagement, but the effort that we have put in and the submission that we are going to make is certainly going to be acknowledged in the report that we are compiling together with the technical research institutions. So in that context, Steve and your team, we do appreciate your effort and the further invitation that you have extended to us, in government to also partake in your other initiatives. We do appreciate that, and we are willing to share in that regard. And allow me to acknowledge my colleague, Kgotatso. Kgotatso, would you confirm that you are here? I see your name on the list.
Yes, Dr. Sokela, I am here. It's very lovely to hear your voice again. Thank you, Stephen, for bringing my attention to this session. It's a privilege to be part of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kgotatso. Mary, who is part of our technical research institution from the University of Pretoria, would you like to, confirm that you are present?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Dr. Sokela. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. I look forward to it because as a technical research institution contribution to the APMR, we look forward to many of the engagements in the topic that, in the list of the topics that I see this webinar is about. So yeah, I'm very much happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ndevu from the Stellenbosch University School of Public Leadership. Are you here? Maybe he's not here, he may be joining us later, but those are the two colleagues from the technical research institutions, that is the University of Pretoria and School of Public Leadership at Stellenbosch, that we are working with as far as our internal work that we are doing. We are on track so far. We worked over the December, January holidays. So because we had no choice in terms of the work that, we're supposed to do. We are going to be putting a draft on the table of the NGC in 3 weeks' time. And once we have that mandate, we will be able to share with you at the same time that you share with us in terms of the work that you are busy, consulting on. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I request that I be excused at 10:30 because I have other commitments. But thank you very much. I do appreciate the work that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Sokela, for that update and for calling attention to the other auspicious colleagues that are on the call and working on the Aprm South Africa process. I see that Mr. Thulani Chifuta has joined the call. I'd like to now give the floor to the chairperson of the SA NGC. Mr. Thulani, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all colleagues in the call, and thanks to you, Program Director, and Stephen, for extending the invitation to us to join and participate in this important session. And also acknowledge Dr. Sokela and the team, and my long lost dear friend and leader, Kgotatso, who has joined us. Chair and colleagues, this is a very important session. It is by no coincidence that you are finding myself as the chair of the NGC of the Aprm in South Africa, joining the same call with Dr. Sokela, who heads the National Secretariat. He has also been elected to lead and chair a session or a forum of all NGC secretariats across the continent, which is an important responsibility. It is by design that we have been in a conversation in the last week where we were finding and agreeing with each other that the work that is being done by the Institute must be supported, and many other sectors of society, because it neatly fits with our vision that the work of the Aprm is not going to be the work of the NGC alone. It is work that will be led by the NGC, yes, and all other sectors of society. But one of the most important things we want our leadership to do is to support self-initiative by any other sector of society that raises a hand to say, we are doing our bit to contribute to the work of the Aprm. This webinar will be discussing very, very important issues that have been raised by young people. It is important that young people begin to take interest on these issues. The whole list of issues that you have identified constitute indicators that are packaged into different thematic areas of the Aprm, be it issues of corporate governance, be it issues of democracy and political governance, be it issues of socio-economic development. So all those issues do constitute part of the indicators that are in the agenda of the Aprm. Why is it important for young people to take interest in this work? It is particularly because once we undertake a country review process, we get to depict or paint a picture of the status quo. Out of that status quo, we must then develop national program of action that gets to be integrated into the plans of the country to drive more progress. We do not undertake Aprm in order to convince ourselves that we are doing well or we are doing so bad. We are doing it such that it informs our future plans. And therefore, it is in the interest of young people that all these issues, whether you talk about any of those indicators, if it is climate change, the effects of climate change will be worsening with future generations of young people. That is why they must take interest. Economic indicators, young people are the hardest hit by unemployment. Young people are the ones who still remain on the margins of the mainstream of economic activity, even in the form of business. That is why young people must begin to take interest in all of this. Of the four already known thematic areas of Aprm, there is an emerging theme on state resilience, which also begin to cover issues of COVID. South Africa is fortunate that in all its priorities, whether in the NDP, as Tessa Dooms would bear testimony, whether it is in the national medium-term strategic framework, there is a priority on building a developmental ethical state. And in that case, South Africa is in a position of advantage that the state capacity or resilience of the state will not be something new to us. Interestingly, in the last month, the Aprm in the continent has been discussing a youth mainstreaming tool, which will begin to look into the issues of youth development, not after everything else has been considered, said and done, but we want to integrate the plight and the interests of young people into the mainstream of what we will be doing. When we have a conversation about democracy and political governance, that conversation will not be enough without understanding and integrating the interests and the plight of young people on political issues, the same conversations on the economy. And so this is a timely conversation. As the NGC of the Aprm in South Africa, we will open ourselves up. We will not even be trying to interpret the work that you shall have done. We will give you an opportunity to come and address our NGC and make presentations of the good work that we have done. And with those few words, I want to thank you so much, colleagues, for having this session. It is indeed of keen interest to us and the work that we do as the leadership of the NGC of the Aprm in South Africa. Siyabulela.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thulani Chifuta, for those encouraging and very hopeful words. And just knowing that after this report is done, we actually, as young people, are going to have a platform with the NGC to take forward this work. I know Dr. Sokela did mention that he'd like to excuse at 10:30, and which is coming very close. So we'd like to thank you, Dr. Sokela, for your participation today. And we look forward to engaging you in future as the process unfolds. So now, colleagues, we are going to be moving to the next segment of this program, and we will hear from Mr. Lennon Munyai, who is a researcher and youth liaison at the Aprm Secretariat. Lennon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, my sister Luanda. I would like to take this opportunity to first stand on the existing protocol in the interest of time. However, I would also want to recognize the presence of the South African NGC led by Dr. Sokela, and the presence of my sister, Madam Khotatso, as well as my brother, Mr. Thulani Chifuta, who has done a lot to actually push the youth mainstreaming agenda at the Aprm. I also want to recognize the work done by the South African Institute of International Affairs with Mr. Stephen Cruz and Luanda, as well as Tessa Dooms at the Jasoro Consultancy. I've been involved with this program from its inception, not as an active participant, but as an observer. My work at the Aprm Secretariat has been doing research for country reviews and participating in country reviews. However, when the Aprm was getting revitalized, I was requested to assist in launching a youth program. Over the past few years, we have managed to put together an interim youth network, which has been functioning and led by Mr. Musa Kondo from the Republic of Mali. We held a youth symposium in Chad, which kickstarted some of the work that we have achieved so far. I can let you know that from the Aprm Secretariat, youth mainstreaming has become a big part of the agenda. In the 2020 to 2024 strategic plan, civil society participation is a key priority area. But civil society participation has come on board largely because I would like to credit young people, including young people that have been participating in the SIRE program, for having pushed and lobbied the Aprm Secretariat as well as the NGCs and focal points. I can let you know that a week and a half ago, I was in a meeting which was chaired by His Excellency, the focal points of South Africa, who welcomed the idea of further upscaling the work that we're doing on youth, particularly with youth mainstreaming. One of the things that was accepted is a toolkit, which will become a supplementary questionnaire that member states can undertake while doing country reviews or targeted reviews. This, for me, is something that's very encouraging because over the past few years, a lot of work has been put in getting the Aprm to understand that other than member states, in terms of the key structures of the Aprm participating, ownership of the Aprm process largely depends on the people, and the people that actually have a lot of energy and can popularize the Aprm and make it accessible to the people are the youth themselves. So one of the main things which has become sort of synonymous with youth is the issue of being rowdy and complaining. But young people, again, in South Africa have shown leadership in coming together, galvanizing themselves, and actually contributing positively to the Aprm process. So I would like to end by taking off my head and saying congratulations to the young people of South Africa, more than 150 young people who actively put this well-written report together. You have shown leadership, and to some extent, this is a best practice which other member states of the Aprm can consider accepting, where young people will preempt the country review by submitting consolidated document showing the interests of young people and what they would like to see in changing the way they're governed and the key issues that affect them. So let me conclude by really thanking the young people of South Africa that contributed to this report, as well as thanking Saya, Jasoro, as well as the structures of the Aprm in South Africa, who have lobbied other member states to accept youth participation in the Aprm process, as well as being here to actually partake in the validation of this report. So I'll end by saying thank you. I wish you all the best. The Aprm Secretariat welcome this initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Lennon. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers of the opening session for really great remarks and keeping to time. Now we're going to move on to the more content-related sessions. And to kick us off for the session, we are going to begin with the presentation by Mr. Kenneth Diole, who is going to be taking us through the institutional planning section. Kenneth, I know you probably would want to share your screen. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi, Luanda. I just wanted to check, must I share the working doc, or can I just make remarks based on the feedback that I got from the group about what are some of the—
You can just make remarks, Kenneth.
Okay.
You can just make remarks, Kenneth. I'll probably share just one slide of your recommendations while you talk, if that will help.
Okay, no, that's great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again to everybody who's been involved in this process. I'm so grateful to be part of it again. So I'll be sharing particular insights from the institutional working group. And so we looked at an institutional level, what ought to have been done or what should be done as per our recommendation. And based on also how the document has laid out, what are some of our current opinions and where do we think we still need to strengthen the document. By and large, the group is quite satisfied with how the inputs from last year have really been articulated in this consolidated document. So thank you to Tessa, to the guys at Jasaro and Saya on that particular element. There's three particular elements that we wanted to comment on. And I think the first one was really to emphasize on what is already articulated there, but I think more so now, even with the youth unemployment numbers coming out. I mean, obviously the 32.5% is a record, but among young people specifically is at 63.2% youth unemployment. And so a topic like this is actually quite pertinent given, the recent statistics as of yesterday. The first part is, the feedback one was at an institutional level, we believe that South Africa has been doing quite a lot in terms of developing the necessary plans. The key challenges, as we have said before and continue to say today, is that the implementation part of the process is where the difficulties are. But not only the implementation of it, but the monitoring and evaluation of that implementation process is where we need to really strengthen our resolve and the mechanisms that are relevant at that particular level. And with the M&E comes the third component, which is the consequence management of what happens when these particular institutional plans are not implemented. And obviously, for the context of those who are not involved in the process, we looked at policies such as the Agenda 2063, Sustainable Development Goals, the National Youth Policy that has been in review as of last year, as well as the National Development Plan, and the National Youth, the NYDP, and the work that they do in ensuring that young people are represented at that particular level. And the three key elements that stand out there is one, M&E is important, the necessary budget that accompanies the implementation of those particular policies, and the consequence management of what happens in the process of when these things are not particularly done. Secondly, the key element that was raised even in reflection about the document that has been placed on the table at the moment is the question of representation, right? The current representation, largely at an institutional level, is from a political deployment perspective. And part of the shortcomings of that particular process is the capacity and the capability, as was recognized by the groups, but broadly in conversation, to say, when you are represented from a particular mandate, you look at that at any issue and any institutions from your mandate, and not necessarily always from a holistic perspective. And so the thing that we're also calling upon here is that we really look at how do we ensure capacity building, in particular of young people, so that they're capacitated and have the requisite capabilities to execute at an institutional planning level, to ensure that not only do we have the requisite plans, but we have the process, as I've mentioned before, the M&E, the budget, and the consequence management of that particular process. At a third point, we spoke about an oversight role, which is, there are two things that we are noting. Number one, increasingly there's a talent flight from South Africa among young people, among talented practitioners, which will lead our state and the various institutions that we were looking at vulnerable in terms of their ability to deliver and to deliver to young people across South Africa, but also how we form part and parcel of the broader African mandate as part of the African peer review mechanism. And that is a key one around what is the role, therefore, that we must look at in planning at an institutional level to ensure that, one, we retain the talent, but also maybe how do we access our talent at a diaspora level might be important, because here we looked at things who is familiar with the process. If we think about it from a parliamentary process, there's often what you call oversight committees which have a 5-year mandate. But the challenge is that there's no consistency in the members. So if a member has been recalled by the political party, they have to restart, or the new member has to restart the process. The technical knowledge of whatever it is that the oversight is might be lost over time. The process of how things unfold, and most importantly, the consistency of ensuring that things are implemented accordingly become things that might be compromised in that particular process. And then the last comment really from our group was really around that when we looked at the particular plan, I think it articulates everything that we have written, but the more important element, I think maybe in the event of what has happened between when we submitted and now, is the element of inclusion. Inclusion is absolutely paramount in how not only we look at the planning process, but how the execution is done. The inclusion of members of the LGBTQI+ community, the inclusion of people in rural, peri-urban, and obviously urban areas. And if I may use the members who've been part of this process as an example, is that I think most of us, especially if I may speak for my group, we found ourselves in urban areas. We represent a certain level of education and economic opportunity, and there is a recognition that there are voices that would have been great, we would have appreciated to hear from. So young people in rural areas, what do they think and perceive as about this particular process, and what ought to be done from a governance perspective? That was a key one: rural, peri-urban, and urban inclusion. And then the last point around the inclusion one was really the issue of language. So it is also something that we're looking forward to see if this particular document, once it is finalized and consolidated, will it be translated in all 11 languages, or actually should I say 12, including sign language, because we want as many young people as possible to be part and parcel of this process, to understand what has happened, but to understand what we, the young people who are part of this process, representative of many others, are hoping could happen with, in this particular process, and the various stakeholders who will participate in this. And so on those 4 points, I really want to say thank you to the powers that be for allowing us to participate in this process, and affording us an opportunity to interrogate at a deeper level. There's been so many great steps that has happened. I think I'll give an example. In institutional planning, one of our group members, Danele Mabaso, has also been at the forefront of really holding accountable institutions like the NYDA through various parliamentary process to ensure that representation and the people who are representing are the people that young people actually want to be part of the process. So we are recognizing and we're happy that the process that has been made, but more importantly, I think a lot of people in this process have already taken on some of these recommendations and are implementing them in their various workflows in whichever institutions that they find themselves. With that, thank you very much for the opportunity. I appreciate it, and all the best for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, who has touched on issues such as planning and implementation, skills and institutional memory, and inclusion. Colleagues, I'd like to request that we go through all the 3 speakers of the session and then open it up for Q&A. But please, you may go ahead and start using the chat function to give your questions, your comments, and we will give an opportunity to colleagues to raise their hands and take the floor after the 3 speakers of the session have spoken. And with that, I'd like to invite Andile Mtombeni to take the floor to speak about political participation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Luanda, for that introduction, and good morning, colleagues, and everyone present. I would like to also take the opportunity to thank SIA, the team members of SIA, for putting together such a well-consolidated report and capturing all our remarks and our inputs that our groups, our different groups had come together as youth to give input onto this report. I would also like to thank Ms. Tessa for facilitating this process from the beginning. We really look forward to where this project is going. Thank you once again for inviting us as well to come and validate this report. I think this is such a crucial process as well, that, you know, us as youth get to come back as well and speak on behalf of what we put forward, because often we see that we make inputs, but often really after that do we get involved further. So really would like to thank you, colleagues, for doing this and making this workshop possible. I'm here today representing my group, Group 5, which was looking at youth political participation. And having gone through the report and the consolidated report, I think just as Mr. Kenneth said as well, that we really were captured very well in terms of the inputs and points that we raised. And I think I'd also like to just highlight briefly some of the most important things that we raised in our group that was looking at youth political participation. So as we know that majority of the population globally is young people, and we know in South Africa that over 60% of the population is youth, and youth is defined in South Africa as people who are between the ages of 16 to 35. But as much as this is the case, 16 to 35, we often see that the representation in certain government structures in parliament, we are often, as young people, represented by people who call themselves young people in paper or at heart, but not necessarily young people. I mean, the ANC Youth League a couple of years ago was just an example of that, where their youth leader was not even 35, was above 35. So I think that is also important, that we need to acknowledge the fact that the definition of youth in this country is 16 to 35. And because we make up majority of the population, over 60%, it's quite crucial that we are, as young people, are then involved in political processes that will determine not only our current present, but also the future, because we are the future. But we see that there is a lack, more and more, a lack of participation of young people in political processes, in electoral processes. We also noted, for example, our team, what we decided to do is to come up with research with the guidance of the document that was given to us by Ms. Tessa on how to go about conducting our research. And we looked into the research as to what has the political participation of young people in electoral processes been like over the past couple of years, since 1994, attaining democracy, until 2019, which was our last 6th national election. So two main themes that we looked at was youth participation in government, as well as youth participation in elections. So then we asked the questions of, but why? Because we saw that, so for example, between the age group of 29, between 29 to 30, there has been like a 10% decrease of young people turning out to vote or to register. We saw in 2019 in our last election that a lot of young people were making remarks even on national television that they're not interested in voting or they're not interested in taking part in electoral processes. So then ours was to ask the but why question, so that at the end we get to the so that we can explain why that is. But why is it young people are not participating? And some of the things that we highlighted and noted were issues of tokenism, for example, that even though Parliament will come up with so-called pseudo solutions, that I call them pseudo solutions because they look good on paper, but in practicality, they're not being practiced. There's a lack of accountability. So, for example, in our group, we noted that in our research, we saw that Parliament, even though there's a lack of youth participation, first of all, within the different political parties. So we went through the different political parties to say, out of the representation, 490 MPs and people. And we noted that even though there's a growth from 2014, which was 6% representation of young members of parliament, to 2019, which is now moved to 10%, but that's still fairly a small proportion when you take into account that we have 490 representation and only 10% of that is young people. So clearly, political parties need to do a lot more. And one of the things that we discussed in our group is that there needs to be a holding of accountability. And one of the recommendations that we also put forward was that there needs to be a quota that is met so that ensures that there is equal representation when it comes not only just to gender, but also to young people being represented at parliament. And we also spoke about the issue that young people is not only just about the age, but we also need to take into account that young people are not homogeneous. We come from different geographical locations. We come from different cultural backgrounds. So therefore, we need to take all of these things into account. And yes, government has put initiatives forward to say that we've got youth parliament trying to make up for some of these gaps that have been identified. However, once again, we know that in South Africa, we are good at making things good on policy, on papers, but when it comes to practicality and actually implementing, there's issues of tokenism, there's corruption that is involved. We see this also with the NYDA, where we've got these youth institutions that are put forth by the government. But again, the people who are appointed into those institutions or the people who are appointed to act on behalf of the youth or the voices, so-called, either politically connected, and there's all kinds of corruption and tokenism of how the young people get into those spaces. So it's not a representation of the youth voices in South Africa. So then we also called for one of the solutions that we also called for, particularly when it comes to lack of political representation of young people and young voices, that there needs to be consideration going forward. So, for example, we know that Honorable Likota, yes, recently in February, the Minister of Home Affairs, they had their portfolio committee on home affairs, and that there is a submission to amend the electoral bill so that there is individual participation, so that this encourages young people then to stand as independent candidates who can run for parliament without being stifled, being part of a political party. And also, we also looked at how do political parties get their funding, because we know that running a political party costs money, and that's why we also see a discouragement of young people participating in politics. So we also noted that there is, of course, an act that has been amended to say that political parties need to show and indicate who their biggest funders are and where their money is coming from, because we know that money, the judge said that there is no such a thing as a free lunch. So where the money comes from is where the mandate is coming from. So that transparency and accountability of political parties and where their funding is coming from is also going to then ensure that there is accountability and young people are also represented in that regard, or rather young people know where that representation is coming from.
Andile. Apologies, if you could please start summing up. Thank you, Andile. Thank you for those key points from
right. Thank you. So as you can see, then highlighted, and I think as a way forward.
Thank you, Andile. I think we are running out of time. We've already started eating into the next presentation's time. I'm not sure if you're able to hear this, but if we could please sum up.
I think Andile's network has
okay,
failed.
I think maybe just to highlight the key points that this group has discussed, presented by Andile this morning, are matters related to youth participation in government and in elections against the backdrop of the official definition of youth in South Africa. It is the issue of apathy, which stems from tokenism, the heterogeneity of youth in South Africa, and the matter of political party funding. And with that, we'd like to thank Group 5 for a really excellent presentation and capturing those really great thoughts. I'd like now to call Zinzi Mroetwana of the Health and Social Services Group. Zinzi, the floor is yours, please. Zinzi?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead with your presentation.
All right. All right.
Hi, Zinzi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm having a bit of trouble with my network.
We are able to hear you, Zinzi. Do you want to maybe try? Zinzi? Tessa, is there anybody else from this group that can maybe present on behalf of Zinzi?
Hi, I'm not sure. It's a bit confusing because I think we can hear Zinzi's background, and maybe we just need to contact her.
Because what we can do, maybe we can just move into the Q&A for the two speakers while we figure out how to proceed with Zinzi's presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, I see somebody on the group is putting a name forward, Sureka. Is that a person from this group, Sisipo? Sureka, would you be in a position to present on behalf of Zinzi? Just a quick 5-minute presentation on health and social services. Sureka?
I've also put I've put it up, so if Sureka is able to, she can just engage with what's on the screen.
Okay, I just have not heard back from Sureka.
Or Zinzi. I think your idea is right, Luanda. Let's do a Q&A and just try and get a hold of Zinzi on the side.
All right, Tessa, thank you. So colleagues, I'm going to open the floor up for some questions from views, just to share your interventions of how you perceived these presentations from the groups, and for suggestions, please may you use the raise hand function so I can identify you and give you the floor. Alternatively, you can just post your question or intervention on the chat function. Okay, I can see one hand from Bright Miranda. Bright, the floor is yours, please.
All right, good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Okay, I pretty much just heard about this, the whole ARPM thing recently. Actually, I saw a post on Twitter inviting folks to join. My question really is, how can we participate, be it in the compilation of the reports or some of the things engaged with ARPM? I'm saying this because I'm a PhD student, and my study really, it touches on the issues of ARPM in Africa, generally in Africa, but particularly focusing on South Africa and Zimbabwe. So I feel these things, they might help some of us who are starting on those topical areas, and also we might also have valuable input to contribute towards the project. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bright. Is there another question? Mzimkulu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot. I heard from the presenters, I'm not sure who mentioned that there's an emerging fifth theme of state resilience, maybe as a sequel to the COVID-19 pandemic. I just wanted clarity on that because I felt it was very important and valuable.
Thank you, Mzimkulu. Was there another question before I hand over to the relevant people to respond? Okay, maybe while we wait for more questions and comments, I'd like to direct the first question maybe to Lennon regarding participation at the APRM, to highlight the different ways that people can participate. And the second question to Lani Chifuta, if you're still available, on state resilience, please. Lennon, over to you.
Thank you. My network is a bit bad. I'm going to ask you if you could please repeat the question again.
The question was related to participation at the APRM, and highlighting that the person who asked is they are a PhD student, and the work of the APRM is relevant to them. How can they participate further?
So there are two ways that I can suggest at this time. We have created an APRM youth network, which is still sort of coming together. It's work in the progress. So they can join that network. We have a WhatsApp group that links up about 200 or so young people from government, civil society, and etc. That's one way in which they can actively participating, but they'll be participating at a continental stage where they see what other countries are doing, particularly youth of other countries, countries that are active, Mali and Chad, with a youth network in those countries. The another way, since the PhD scholar, they can participate in some of the programs that we offer. So, for example, there's AGOS, which is a research program which has been put together by the Secretariat, where you produce papers and present them to the APRM, but particularly on APRM issues. You write these papers, then you get to present them and get them validated. They become part and parcel of APRM knowledge products. But since the structures of the APRM are actually here, one of the things that we are lobbying for is for stronger participation within the national governing councils of the Aprm. And I wanted to ask, I've been asking my brother Tulani to open up more space for youth to actually engage the Aprm process. I think this is also a work in progress. The fact that the DPSA and the NGOs of South Africa is here, I think this leaves room for creativity in which the youth who have just now produced this document can take things forward over and above the document being validated. How can they actively participate post the country review? So these are the current ways in which young people can participate. I'm available myself. I'm easily available on social media as well. If you could email me. Work that we do that has to do with youth is usually publicized on our social media. SAIA has become a strong partner to Aprm. So whenever we run programs, those that are engaged with SAIA usually know as well. So please feel free to write to me in the Secretariat to find ways in which you can participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lennon. And I'd like to now hand the floor to Tulani on the question of state resilience.
So thank you very much. You would remember that the Aprm has been operating on the basis of 4 thematic areas. There is a focus area on political governance, democracy and political governance. There is a focus area on economic governance and management. There is a focus area on corporate governance. And fourthly, there is a focus thematic area on socio-economic development. Now, what the Aprm has been doing is to basically integrate the instruments of Agenda 2063 of the AU, together with the SDGs, into the work of the Aprm. And those have been called a view or viewing the Aprm from an extended mandate point of view. Now, over and above that, there are proposals to add thematic area number 5, which is focused on state resilience. The appreciation of introducing this thematic focus area on state resilience, it is true that COVID-19 has expedited the process of introducing this area. Part of the considerations that go into state resilience is the extent to which the state is a learning institution on its own, that out of everything else that states shall have gone through with COVID-19, what lessons do we draw to make things work better, including building the capacity of the state? Some of the practical examples we can make include the fact that when we make investments on infrastructure of the health facilities, is it a short-term infrastructure investment that will end with the end of COVID-19, or we begin to make quick infrastructure investments and interventions to facilities that will be used long after COVID-19? And if we're able to make those investments and interventions in the quickest time possible, what lessons can we draw from those such that later on, we don't take 12 years to build something that we could have built in 3 months, drawing from the lessons of COVID-19? But secondly, one practical example is that there are better coordination structures and mechanisms that exist now. From the time when the National Cabinet takes a decision, you don't need other interdepartmental processes. You don't need other intergovernmental processes to interpret and reconceptualize the decisions that have been taken by the National Cabinet and the National Command Council. Instead, you have coordination structures and mechanisms that give effect to the decisions that have been taken through implementation. and better support, both from a national to local government and even at a horizontal level, where it may be at a provincial level or at a local level. And so those are some of the lessons that the state resilience element will begin to introduce. And fundamentally, we will be arguing there that for everything else to succeed, including democracy, including the economy, including governance, you need a strong, a resilient state. Thank you very much. And let me also make this point about participation. We are working in terms of our national roadmap as the NGC of South Africa. We are working on a process that will be out there, open to all communities. We are going to publicize that. There will be processes of broad community-based consultations. There will be thematic workshops that will be convening. There will be high-level sessions that will be convening with experts in different areas of our work. There will also be sessions that will be sector-based, where we'll target young people, where we'll target women and different other sectors of society to focus on the themes. But the special role for young people is that we are also working on a plan with two-seaters where we want to draw in on the energy and expertise of young people and integrate them into our structures, even as interns from master's, PhD level, so that they drive this work right from within the structures of the NGC and the Secretariat of the Aprm in South Africa. And so all of those are things that, as they get realized, we will basically publish them so that people are able to link up with those opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thulani. I think there are several factors that were raised by the participation group that I think then would be an interesting factors to discuss as we take this work forward. I don't know if anybody would like to react to that, but also just based on time, we will have to move on to the next session pretty soon.
Hi, Luanda. Kenneth here. Can I just add to what the gentleman before me added on state resiliency, because it was something that we discussed as a group. Is that fine?
Yes, please go ahead, Kenneth, but please keep it at 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, it'll be shorter than that. So I just wanted to add, I think the question was key. And I think in our initial research, one of the key things that came out was part of the building of a state resilience was an issue we talked about, which speaks about talent management, because there's an increasing talent migration / flight in South Africa from the state to private and to private sector, corporate, and even overseas. So that is one thing that I think we've also hoping will be articulated at an institutional level, because the state's resilience is dependent on the strength of its institution. And as a secondary point and last point to that is the element of the consistency in the application of the law, because the resiliency of the state is obviously in itself being able to implement its very laws and procedures, and its people who are leading it be able to be held to the same standards as they're holding everybody else. I think it's a key thing, especially in light of the various commissions that are going on, in particular the Zondo Commission, right? So the state's ability to respond to its own crisis is key to that, and I think that was one key element, or two key elements that we wanted to raise from the institutional planning group. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Kenneth, for that. Just because we are running out of time, I would like to now move on to the next session. The speaker who was not able to connect has been moved to a different session while they work on their connectivity issues. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Tessa Dooms, who will chair the next session. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Great. In the next session, we're going to actually have 4 speakers because we'll have the health group join us as well. So here we'll have Sibusiso who will join us on the land and housing. We have Yolukazi who will do economic empowerment. We have Umhle who will do social cohesion and inclusion. And then we'll have Shureka who will do the health section for us. So we're moving time around a little bit, but I hope everyone will bear with us to take the 4 presentations, and then we'll do a Q&A. Also, just to say that the Q&A is not so much just about questioning the groups, but if you have something that you want to add to what this group has said, please do so as well. We're recording this so that we can capture insights. So if there's something you feel was missing from that group now that you've seen what they've come up with, please feel free to add to that as well. Sibusiso, are you ready for us?
Yes, I am.
I know you've got a presentation as well, so do you want to load that for us?
Yes, let me just do that now. Is it visible?
I think it's saying it's loading, so let's give it a second.
All right.
Thank you for everyone for being so patient about tech and connectivity and all of these kinds of things. We never know what package we're going to get when it comes to the way tech operates. So thank you everyone for being patient with us. Sibusiso, take us through your presentation.
All right, thank you, Tessa. Before I start, I'd just like to take the opportunity, to thank the teams at Saya and Jesoro for, giving us young people the opportunity to engage in this process. It's a very important time for young people in the country, and it's really motivating to know that our voices are actually acknowledged and heard, right? Because then including young people tokenistically in discussions like this is something that has been a very pervasive issue. So it's great to see that we're moving forward from that. So my name is Sibusiso Mazomba. I will be presenting on the perspectives that were shared by the Land and Housing Working Group. So during our drafting process, we realized that most issues with access to land, they stemmed from pre-1994 policies that were infrastructured to stifle the capacity of the Black majority of the country at that time. And in trying to rectify these injustices of the past, addressing principles of land justice that prioritize redistribution, restitution, and land reform, promoting land tenure were very important guiding principles that had to underpin our work. And while there were comprehensive land policies that were geared towards advancing principles of land justice, such as ambitions that are listed within the NDP, actualization of these ambitions and success of implementation is something that's fallen really short. And we were pleased with how our perspectives were reflected in the Aprm in the draft document, but also we saw the urgency of ensuring that land reform, the land reform budget is increased in order to ensure that land justice goals as listed within the NDP are met. We also realized the importance of acknowledging the non-neutral impacts of poor implementation of land reform policies on women smallholders, and further called for more responsive policies to this issue. And then a point of note, the access to land section in the draft also makes lots of references to legislation, and we felt that it would be more important to include the year in which legislation was passed to ensure that all of the goals, the context of that section is aligned to the transformative mandate of the Constitution. And we also realized under the housing, water, and sanitation section, we felt the need to emphasize the importance of good water management in the country with more strict implementation of existing and comprehensive water laws. And under the housing, water, sanitation section, the Department of Human Settlements, Water, and Sanitation is referred to as the Department of Human Settlements, Water, and Sanitation, and this is something that should be changed. We also felt it important to reflect that more emphasis needs to be put on integrating and upgrading informal settlements and ensuring that service provision to this area is something that is prioritized. This will be then effective in consolidating our recommendations and ensuring that more solid plans go into capacitating service provision and formalizing informal settlements while ensuring that they are integrated into the service grid of the country. We also found it quite important to give more context to the infographic that is reflected in the draft document in order to align it to the agenda of water and sanitation as listed in the housing, water, and sanitation section of the draft document. And then we also had a section on infrastructure development. We also saw it very important to ensure that we contextualize issues of the digital divide and the technological gap that exists in the country to issues that are being faced currently, such as the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it affects the tenability of education for young people in the country, especially in underprivileged areas. We saw how COVID-19 has exposed the entrenched inequality that lives and breathes in our society and how it exacerbates the technological gap. And then in addressing this, we saw it important to reflect principles of interoperability, adopting indigenous languages in ICT applications, and ensuring that there is digital inclusion as listed in the Department of Telecommunication and Postal Services policy documents. Interoperability mainly speaks to government ICT systems that must have capacity to talk to each other and allow for architected sharing and exchange of electronic messages and documents, collaborative applications, distributed data processing and report generation, seamless transaction services and whole government searches and queries, integrated ICT system and management. And at least 75% of South Africans do not have access to ICT infrastructure. And just to wrap up, failure to provide access to the previously disadvantaged the communities will further impede any effort on electronic government initiatives. The use of ICTs in government must ensure that all citizens have equal access. And in a fair and rational society, all individuals have equal opportunity to participate in or benefit from the use of ICT resources by virtue of their citizenship, regardless of race, gender, religion, age, class, creed, or any of those factors. And empirical research in all nations confirms that the growing gap between the rich and the poor, as well as between the well-educated and the poorly educated users of ICT, as researchers broaden their scope to examine developing nations, the digital divide is of increasing concern and is essential to a developmental state. And just to my parting words is, myself and my group have been really inspired by the vigor that has been, demonstrated by members of our group. And we are really looking forward to the next phase of ensuring that, the ambitions listed within this youth submission of the Aprm are catapulted into action and are actualized so that the voice of young people is recognized and acknowledged because it is really important. And with that, I would like to finish. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to ask Umhle and the social inclusion group to go next. Yolokazi, as so well put by this group, is having a bit of a connectivity challenge, so she's going to come on just after Umhle. So Umhle, if you're ready.
Camera off, just for data usage.
That's fine.
Yeah. I'm just uploading my presentation.
Great.
Sorry, Tessa, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. You can go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Omhle Nchimila, and I'll be briefly presenting on the youth contributions to inclusion and social cohesion in South Africa. Our team very strongly wanted to note that with all of our contribution, we had taken into consideration and noted the historical impacts that has presented challenges for social inclusion and cohesion to be realized in an equitable manner in South Africa. And this, we believe, has been deepened by the lack of ideology and coordination from current governance structures dedicated to inclusion and social cohesion in the country. And given the many areas of society that connects to inclusion and social cohesion, the following four structures that we had chosen to look at, given the guidelines that Tessa had given us, we will lengthily focused on, and are in no particular order right now in my presentations. In this presentation, I decided to just summarize the section of the document by looking at the problems and the tensions that we have found as we went along within our own research, our own lengthy discussions, and discussions with the youth at length. One of the things that we did as a group was we took out different surveys that looked at social cohesion and inclusion in religion, nationality, race and ethnicity, and LGBTQIA+ rights in South Africa. The results that came back, we were hoping for it to reach different provinces and not, as Tessa said, not necessarily just reach metropolitan areas, but also reach out into the more marginalized areas that have never really been asked for opinion before, or where youth don't even have platforms to give back their opinions or to give back any sort of comments that they might have to these certain related issues. And with the problems and tensions that we noted with religion was that given that South Africa has one of the most religiously engaged societies on the continent, our constitution is also proactive in the protection of the religious freedom. But however, we did state that the government has not been able to build a regulatory environment that not only monitors religious activities in the country, but keeps religious groups accountable for unlawful religious behavior. And we've seen so many individuals and communities try to bring these types of crimes and corruptions to book through cases such as the Prophet Shepherd Bushiri case and the sexual harassment case against Timothy Omotoso in South Africa. Now, these following crimes, as a group, we noted that they've brought so much mistrust in the religious sector, making it difficult for different religions or different groups in society to integrate, to collaborate, and have collective efforts with each other in contributing to the livelihood of society. When it came to nationality, this was one of our biggest struggles, but one of our most contentious issues, even amongst ourselves as a youth in the group. And we noted that despite South Africa's own growing population, South Africa over the years has become host and home to many people across the globe. This has increased. This increase has been due to many different various reasons, social, political, and economic reasons. And in this, our group noted that this has presented its own challenges, including the lack of understanding of migration, the lack of accountability from government, and which has resulted to situations and conflicts such as xenophobia, Afrophobia, and the lack of awareness and accountability from key leaders in society in regards to the alienation of migrants in our own country. These examples would be politicians blaming migration or blaming migrants in the country for the lack of service delivery to citizens in the country. And we've seen commentaries such from King Mangosuthu that has been very divisive towards different nationalities, calling migrants burdens or parasites in our country. And as a group, we highlighted in the section that this sort of political behavior and separation has caused so much conflict among citizens and foreign nationals that it has not only caused tension, but has robbed both parties of an opportunity to collaborate with each other and collectively celebrate a continental lineage in which we shared through our history. And with race and ethnicity, what we saw were not only the ineffective policies and implementations towards equity, but it's that race and ethnicity in South Africa has been the cornerstone of our division. And this has caused like immense distrust amongst communities across the country. And the youth today, our biggest problem is that we are forced now to navigate these tensions and these spaces amongst race, even though we did not experience what brought them to be. And this is because race still plays a very significant role in not only the oppression of different marginalized groups in our country, but the social status and the access to economic opportunities because of our race and ethnicity. And this is just one of the challenges that we thought was very significant to highlight and to continue highlighting even after we have validated our section in the workshop. With LGBTQI rights in South Africa, we noted that even though the community's rights are enshrined within our constitutional framework, however, the lived experiences of community members still present alarming evidence of attitudinal behavior that needs a shift and a stern response from key actors in society. With the recommendations given, these are just some of the recommendations, not all of them. Due to time, I'd wish we could go through all of them. But in religion, our group had strongly suggested that South Africa needs to look into strengthening more of its regulations to ensure that citizens are protected from fraud and extortion. In nationality, we believe that South Africa must, and when we say South Africa, we're not only meaning the states, but all key actors, the state, civil society, and private sector, must hold all actors of society accountable to the violation of human rights and the continued attitudes that seek to promote divisive ideologies within nationalism. With race and ethnicity, we looked at how South Africa's reconciliation process still needs a lot of reworking and reframing. And I think this is such a great opportunity to bring in more of the youth voice, because I think that what is being implemented today is something that our generation needs to live through for a very long time. So having the youth voice in the implementation stage, but also in policy drafting is very, very important in order for us to have different and diverse voices that work along and give new vibrant ideas on how to tackle reconciliation, social cohesion, and inclusion in our country. And with LGBTQ rights, we believed that South Africa should have a more integrated plans amongst all different stakeholders of societies in order to tackle inclusion based on gender and sexuality in all spheres. But more onto that, to also give more funding and more platforms and access to grassroots movements to actually be the gap in between legislative frameworks and attitude shifts in society. Lastly, but not least, we believe that as the youth, our group really does believe that as the youth, continuous mobilization must not be slowed down or must not be deteriorated because of the amount or the magnitude of the challenge that social cohesion presents to us. But we did want to also highlight very promptly that inclusion and social cohesion in South Africa will not succeed without the operation of all key actors in society, but imperatively equity at the forefront of South Africa's development agenda. Thank you, Tessa.
Well done. Well done. These presentations have been really, really good this morning. You guys have put in so much thought and effort into what key points you're bringing across to the audiences. So really well done, guys. I also just wanted to, at this point, acknowledge the Western Cape Commissioner and the Child Government Monitor Group, whose inputs into this section, the social inclusion section, were really important. because they gave an insight into, because the child monitors group in the Western Cape is majority teenagers, which was an important voice to bring into this. And so some of their recommendations are reflected here and also in the education section that will come a bit later. And so I just wanted to acknowledge them at this point as contributors to this section of the work, but really well done, guys. Untle, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen as we move to the next presentation, which will be Yolokazi presenting on economic empowerment. And before Yolokazi starts, I also wanted to just do a shout out to Activate. So we had two economic development groups. We had economic empowerment groups. We had initially set up an economic empowerment group, but then Activate, the organization, Activate Change Drivers, also wanted to participate. They came in a bit later into the process and also did an economic development section, which we were able to merge to reflect some of the findings that Yolokazi is going to discuss with us. Yolo?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Tessa. Thank you so much. My name is Yolokazi Mfuto. I am from the Economic Empowerment Group. I am based in the Eastern Cape. I was group lead in my group, but however, I'll be doing the presentation alone. My group members are welcome to add in on things I did not include in the presentation. I will not be having a slideshow. I'll present from my notes and what we have been discussing on our group. Unfortunately, when we got the final product, our group could not meet due to our dynamic schedules, and some people were writing exams in their current semester. So we just, but definitely on my introduction, we have that this an eye-opening research for us as young people. And the one thing that we have,
you should fix this and all that, which I need to. Like, I didn't know about presenting like participants.
Can people please mute their mics if they are not speaking? We are overhearing a phone conversation right now while Yolokazi is presenting. So if you're not presenting, please may you mute your mic.
Thank you so much. So I was saying, it is very important that we know that this was a very important research initiative for us as young people. And what we discovered in our group is the fact that all of us as participants were all affected by these issues. And we're speaking as primary, when you speak on research, you are primary stakeholders of this. And it was very interesting because sometimes we could reminisce about the importance of economic empowerment in South Africa and going back to the different economic policies that the country has had. Also, my personal observation was the fact that this was inclusive of everyone. We had young people from all over the country and young people from all over different backgrounds. So it was important that we could listen to each other and make sure that each and every, all our voices were heard and all our points and contributions were included in the final product. And we are very happy that all our submission was well captured in the final product. But definitely we saw that what the perception in our space right now, particularly in our government, is that young people are seen as different, as of course, consumers, not people who are able to contribute meaningfully into the economy or potential stakeholders in the economy who can drive the economy. And of course, young people are the majority. They take about 60% of the population, but when it comes to employment and economic empowerment, they are very not much represented. And young people are seldom part of decision-making, especially in the economy, especially in the business and all high-paying jobs in government. Also, the existing employment initiatives that we currently have, mentioning your EPW, CWP, the YES project, they are not much of tangible change makers in young people's lives. For instance, the EPWP, and people would make contributions saying that, yes, this is employment, but does it actually link with wage policy? A person has to earn this amount for them to be considered as people who are employed and contributing to the economy. That was not necessarily something that we kind of catched up on as the group, because yes, we have the policies, but are they effective? Wow. Are they oh, I'm so sorry. I thought Zoom had kicked me out. Thank you. So these policies, we have policies, but they are not effective enough, and they are they fall short of meeting their threshold or the targeted goals. So they don't meet them. The national growth path, they do not meet their targets, because I believe that and our group believes that young people are not fully included in these policies. So that's why they do not meet their target. I recommend that people who can only do the intentional job shadowing or volunteering be remunerated for their work. They need to be made sure that their services to these institutions, they need to be remunerated so that they can be able to contribute back into the economy. So if they are only volunteers, definitely they won't play a much role. Also, when discussions about change in the policy or change in employment equities or discussion about equality, young people have to be the main stakeholders in discussing these things because they affect them directly. For instance, we have the Employment Equity Act ensuring that young people have to be part of these institutions, but that doesn't really happen. No, it does not happen because young people are not included. So we made those recommendations, and of course, we saw that this has to happen. We need to have agency in terms of implementation of these recommendations because they speak to young people right now, and economic empowerment is directly linked to everything else, including particularly the education, quality education. If people are not employed and somehow they are parents and they need to take their kids to school, they won't be able to take them to a better school because the government does not offer free education. So young people are able to send their kids to school so they can pay school fees. So if economic empowerment does not happen now, everything else was going to fall short because people cannot take their kids to school or they can't fund their own education. Secondly, it links back to healthcare. They can't be able to fund their own healthcare because they are not paid enough or they are not participating fully or realizing their full potential in the economy. So it is important that this has to be implemented as soon as possible so that everything else can be resolved. In South Africa now we have a number of challenges. However, the economy, the one challenge as a country and young people in front of change. So those observations that we had, and this is what we would like to share with the broader South Africa so that we can be able to be part of the economic if it had rejuvenation, but we need to make sure that young people are at the forefront. Thank you so much. If my group members have sentiments to add, they are welcome to do that. Thank you so much, Tessa. Thank you so much, everyone. This is great. It has been we are going to this Zoom meeting and we go make sure that the government officials. Thank you so much.
Great. Yola's way of presenting made me want to scream youth to the front the whole time. Thank you, Yola, for bringing that up and also just highlighting the fact that economic participation is not just about young people. It's also about the fact that young people have other responsibilities in society, like raising children, like being, contributors to their families. And so their economic upliftment is the society's economic upliftment. So our last introduction into the session before we do a quick Q&A is Shareka, who's going to speak on health and social services. Zinzi had a connectivity issue. I think all her connectivity has been lost. And so we're asking Shareka to jump in at the last minute. And so we're grateful that she's agreed to do so. Shareka, are you ready for us?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much, Tessa. Good day, everyone. My name is Sureka Bagelu, and I will be presenting on behalf of the Health and Social Services group.
You can go ahead.
Right. So apologies for jumping in at the last minute, but I will try and do my best. Okay, so with regards to health and social services, the group firstly started off by looking at some of the key issues that are going on in our society. And I think we focused on South Africans who have been economically excluded due to dispossession and exclusion as a result of the apartheid regime and the disproportionate dispersion of wealth in our country, right, where most of the country's wealth is attributed to a minority of individuals and institutions. And the fact that post-democratic restitution has failed to restore economic equality and dignity to the majority of Black South Africans. The second issue we focused on was the rise of digitalization, where there's expected to be a shift in the labor market away from labor-intensive jobs to ones that require technology and highly specialized skill sets. And the third issue we looked at were the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and the resultant economic crisis that will depress income earning opportunities, as well as the disposable income citizens have available to them. And so the poor will get poorer, and it may be more difficult, or not maybe, but it is becoming more difficult for people to afford basic goods and services. And so from the perspective of health and social services, we looked at the basic income grant and other forms of social protection, and as well as the NHI bill. So I'm going to go into kind of looking at ideally the picture of success, or kind of what we would hope for South Africa if these problems were resolved. So we would hope that a solution would achieve two things. Firstly, short-term economic relief and long-term income flexibility that enables people to meet saving goals, pursue meaningful work, and achieve economic mobility that will diminish poverty and inequality. And so in an ideal picture, the basic income grant is calculated to cover the costs of basic goods and services that each South African would be entitled to, and that's not already provided through state benefits. In the short term, the amount shall provide sufficient room for individuals to be shielded from the psychological stress of making ends meet every month. This may improve the mental health of those seeking work, their interactions with family and other members of society, and their overall happiness, which translates to a more optimistic and engaged population. In the long term, people will feel encouraged to pursue additional income streams. This increases their spending power as money flows back into the economy, and it also enables people to save towards the future, which reduces state dependence down the line. Families have the ability to educate and pass on financial independence to younger and up-and-coming generations, and the average individual has the ability to pursue a job that interests them rather than the one they're forced to keep. There will be more room for skilled individuals to study and shape the future of the job market. And there will be a slight dissociation between having a job and living a decent life. The labor market will then be less sensitive to technological advancements. As a society, we can invest in efficient and sustainable solutions without destabilizing the livelihoods of a great chunk of the populations. And companies are incentivized to pay or treat their employees better, and this would improve the working environment. So that was kind of just a picture of ideal picture of what we hope for South Africa and what led to some of our recommendations. So when looking at how this would benefit the youth, we looked primarily at financial independence and being able to have more choices in life, having improved mental health, increased opportunities, feeling encouraged to be more innovative, and looking forward to contributing towards society and making change. We believe that it is the state's responsibility to enforce concrete plans based on the recommendations and studies of various research groups. We also believe that there should be partnerships between civil society and the government. Basic income is a societal issue that needs a combined effort, as well as NHI. And the private sector, in terms of encouraging future leaders in the public sector and investing in the goals of the basic income grant and NHI, they should create a platform for direct funding and skills to the necessary parties. In terms of policies and evaluations and looking at some of the recommendations that we made, what needs to be improved is the understanding of what a basic income grant would represent for South Africans. At present, there's a stigma to deny tangible support to citizens out of fear that it will create dependency on the state, when the opposite is true. Fiscal relief programs should also extend to refugees and asylum seekers who are resident in the Republic, as their basic human needs and dignity matters too. The basic income grant should not be a blanket estimate, but rather a system based on the recipient's geographical cost of living. And we also want to look at the efficiency of payment systems. So current grant payment methods should be expanded and securitized so that they are fast and reliable. In terms of the NHI, we're looking at greater moves to legislate and for the government to have more concrete timelines and plans for implementation, so that the youth has more time to, or that society has more time to view and criticize these legislations. Yeah, so I think that's the crux of what I was hoping to discuss today. And I was also hoping that if anyone else from the group is present and maybe feels that I left out anything or would like to draw attention to any particular points, please feel free to do so. And I just want to shout out the group in general for the way that they worked last year. And for Zinzi as a team leader, unfortunately, she wasn't able to give her presentation today, but she's been so critical to the group's success and making sure that we get together and stay organized and on top of the submissions. So big shout out to them. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cedrica. Thank you for jumping in at the last minute. This is why groups work together. This is why teamwork matters. We've got about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. I saw some questions in the chat. But are there any comments particularly about the presentations that we've just seen? Any insights, any things that other group members want to add, or yeah, anything that anyone wants to raise? Tefadzwa was asking, it would be interesting to learn from the researchers how youth formations working on extractive industries like mining and SA were engaged in the Aprm SA initiative. So my response to that, if I could, would just be to say that what we did is do a very open call, and we wanted to get to as many different kinds of young people in different areas and communities. I don't know whether we specifically reached out to any mining communities or communities in those kinds of situations, but I certainly do hope that we've reached out far enough that they had the option to opt in or not. But that's certainly a point to think about, a particular kind of grouping of young people. Tefadzwa, you also had a question you wanted to raise. Please jump in.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'd like to congratulate all the team members for making these presentations.
I was really inspired, and I wish you the best in all the processes. I just wanted to find out whether the research initiatives also took into account of the need to build on already existing literature, given the fact that South Africa plays a very important role, not only in the Southern Africa region, but on the continent as a whole. With reference to the former President Thabo Mbeki as the AU chair, as well as Madame Zuma as the AU commissioner. So I was just trying to get more insights in terms of whether at that time when the former leaders took those leadership roles, were there any youth engagements that were documented, which the current team leaders were building on that already existing literature? Thank you. Over to you.
All right, thank you. Susan, you had a question?
Thank you, Tessa. Good morning, everybody. Please allow me to congratulate everyone for the great presentation. I think the submission was very solid, but I have a question for the group that was working on land justice and land reforms. I heard the presenter talking about the issue of accessibility and how the issue of accessibility to land largely referred to legislation. But what I wanted to find out is how accessible is land to the youth? Because the issues of land, especially in South Africa, are very hot issues that have been constantly recurring. So I would like to just get a sense of whether the researchers went into looking at that aspect and how exactly it would benefit youth and what incentives are there for youth to access land. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other hands? I'm not seeing any other hands, but is anyone else who wants to jump in with a question before I ask for responses? Any other contributions? Please remember also to drop your hand once you've asked your question. Justin, I see your hand is up.
Yes, regarding equitable economic development. A point that was raised was the fact that apartheid has had a very impactful role in the way economy is set in South Africa, especially post-apartheid South Africa. So my question is specifically focused on the private sector and those corporations and extractive sectors that benefited from the apartheid system. What role do they have in redesigning and reshaping the post-apartheid South African economy?
Who is that a question directed particularly at Yolo, I think? Justin?
Yes.
All right. Cool. So I'm going to ask for the land and then economic empowerment. I think the questions were predominantly to those two groups, but also if anybody who's presented in this section or the previous one wants to speak a bit about your research and how your research efforts and what informed some of your research. Sibusiso, your hands up.
All right, thank you, Tessa. Just to respond to the question on the role of young people and how they have access to land. Just to take from our document, young people, have a large stake in decisions about land and agriculture, and due to costs that are associated with both, young people are often ignored as stakeholders. For example, there are currently no policies that are aimed at engaging young people in land ownership. And if real amends are to be made, the youth must then adopt a very proactive approach by participating in land reform discourse. And in addition to, the integrated rural development plans that target agriculture as a vehicle for rural economic development. Access to land should be something that is, viewed as a resource that will speak to other forms of development. And for example, secure land tenure could assist in tackling social, economic, and financial exclusion that is faced by women and young people. So it should be seen in an intersectional approach should be adopting to tackling land and access for young people. And this is something that we really spoke about as well in our group. And with regards to research, we used, so how we conducted our research was to consult with some policy documents. So we were tackling how land and housing. We then had to, go to different government websites and look at policy documents. And the plan was to also consult with stakeholders just to, consolidate our research perspectives and to make sure that it's as credible as possible, and the information that is communicated, can be seen as credible. So yeah, that's my response. Thank you.
Great. Yolo, do you want to add anything? No. Yolo? I'm not hearing anything. Umhle or Sreka, do either one of you want to respond particularly to the question of research?
Sorry, could you just reiterate, is this the question on how the corporate sector could address past inequality?
Well, I mean, you could input on that as well, for sure.
I don't have any comments on the research part, but I probably would like to contribute to the second question. So
that's fine. You can do that.
Okay, so yeah, in terms of the corporate sector, I find that, and one of the discussions that came up when we were conceptualizing our points was kind of how do you, a lot of the contributions that happen at the moment are very superficial. And so, how do you kind of create feedback loops when, the private sector isn't mandated to really, care about these things? So I think one of the things that the corporate sector can do better is just in their day-to-day operations, in the way that they employ young South Africans, in the way that they upskill them. That would be my response to that effect. I'm not sure if that answers your question, or if you maybe just want to elaborate a bit more, Justin, so I can maybe.
Justin, do you want to add anything?
No, that answer was like it sufficed. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Sis. I can answer the question on research.
Sure, okay.
So in regards to research and how our group went about it, we did look into academic text, but not only academic text, but also public opinion. So anything that the public has responded to, whether it's something that has been passed in parliaments, court papers, but a lot we did look into policies. And this for us was also a learning experience for our group as well when it came to research, in looking at what is the youth really writing on in academic spaces or in civil society spaces. And you'll find that there's so much that the youth has, so much knowledge that the youth has been producing, but that is not really being consumed in circular spaces. And for us, as I said, it was a learning curve, because not all of us were really acquainted with the different topics and discussions that we were engaging. but we took time into learning and took time into delving into groups of research teams beyond just us doing surveys and listening to public opinion. Yeah.
Great. I'm not seeing any more hands, and I think we have covered the questions that we've had on the floor so far. So I'm going to, in the interest of giving as much time as possible to presentations coming up, I think we can move on to the next session that will be facilitated by Chipo, who was the person who actually incidentally wrote a background paper that has been incorporated into this report. And maybe that also responds to the question about, how we went about this. The young people themselves and their groups did a lot of their own research, which relied on various sources. Some of those sources were other young people in the forms of surveys. Some of those sources were policy documents. Some of those sources were academic texts. And I'm glad to hear that they were particularly also looking for young academics. But then we also had Chipo, who was writing a background paper, that kind of did a deep dive into looking at a number of sources as well to consolidate that. So we definitely have drawn on existing work as a way to at least benchmark and understand the issues as well as we possibly could, and so that the recommendations are substantiated. But thank you for this session. I think it's been great thus far, and I'm going to hand over to Chipo to take us through the final stretch of our time together.
Just before she starts, thank you very much, Tess, and to those amazing presentations from all the groups. We had in the program that we were going to have a short break. Do people feel that they want to have a 5-minute break to go to the loo or get something to drink? And it seems a logical place to break it. Or if you're happy to go straight through, I just know that I need a little bit of a break after 2 hours. So Tess, I don't know what you think.
That's my fault. I was getting really, really excited. So yes, I think we should definitely just take a mandatory 5-minute break.
Okay, so we'll be back. Let's be back by 12:05. You can stay online if you wish, but Chipo, you'll take over at 12:05. Okay, thanks, guys. Hello, are you coming to sit with me, boy? Okay, it's 12:05 by my clock, so I think we can hand over to Chipo.
Let me unmute myself. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. It's just become the afternoon. It's lovely to be able to share this time with you and to chair the upcoming session. So before I start, I have two kind of notes. One is a housekeeping note. You'll see in the chat that evaluation form has just been posted below. We'd be really grateful if you'd please fill in the form. The form helps us to understand whether or not the event, how the event worked, what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and so that SIA events in the future can have can just keep on building and building from where they are already. And I thought I'd kind of pick up on the last bits in the previous conversation in terms of what the research looked like. And that was why I was like a smidge late into coming onto the call, because I went to go download the background paper that I sent just to count the references. But basically what you see in this process and this conversation where it's come today is a heavily researched, well thought, well constructed, I think actually great example of collective intelligence. So from my end, the part that I worked on was the background paper, which was going through all of the different sections, finding out what the best practices, what the overall view is from the organizational perspective, and creating a document that had about like 10,000 words or so, with over 170 references, so nearly 200 references, just to get the background in. And that was put together so beautifully by the team at Saya and Josoro, as well as by Katie Clifford, and built into this incredibly strong document that showcases the youth perspective on these issues, but also with a solid background. And so I'm really grateful that today we get to hear from the people who were doing the research, from the people who were talking to each other and gathering excellent evidence. And in this session, we'll be looking at education, climate change, and peace and security. So first up, I'd like to hand over to Dikeledi Maobela from the education section. Can you take it away?
Good, thank you so much. Good afternoon, can you hear me? Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Dikeledi Moabelo. I am representing Group 1, Access to Quality, Basic and Higher Education. From the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals is Goal 4. So my team and I believe that every child has a right to free and quality education. Moreover, every child must be provided with resources so they can execute their ideas and better their lives in the villages they were raised in. Looking into the Constitution, Section 29 speaks to the right to basic education, which has no bounds and limits. And our government is striking fit. And the first step towards assuring quality education is ensuring that educational activities afforded to citizens are up to date. Now, as we all know, there is no school or government or organization that can operate in isolation. We all need to put in a collaborative effort in order to assist disadvantaged schools to produce quality students that will be an asset to the community, to the society, and to the country at large. Hence, we appreciate this kind of initiatives where as youth we are able to, where as youth of South Africa we're able to come together and tackle issues that we face in basic education and in higher educational institutions presented to the government. Well, these are the issues that my team and I have identified. The systemic challenge is that there are no central agencies to coordinate programs. Government only spends 1 to 2% of educational budget to early childhood education, which creates a faulty foundation. So most of these institutions are funded mainly by local NGOs, NPOs, as well as surrounding enterprises, which means rural areas and disadvantaged communities are not prepared for school. Out of 100 pupils that enroll in grade 1, only half of them make it to grade 12. By grade 4, between 75% and 98% of students cannot read. Only 59% of schools in South Africa comply with the minimum required standard of infrastructure. 3,710 schools use PET lavatories, which would take probably like 15 years to replace. And 7,520 schools use boreholes to access water. These are some of the many unsustainable conditions leading to health and safety hazards. Between 2009 and 2019, South Africa was able to grow the percentage of young adults in tertiary education from 4% to 6% with the university alternatives, such as technical and vocational educational and training institutions, are deemed as well inadequate as courses do not meet the employer's need. Now, it's good that we moved from 4% to 6%. Due to the pandemic, the 2020 academic year was forced to integrate digital and no physical learning, where else President Cyril Ramaphosa committed in 2019 to provide each and every learner with a tablet and laptop in which they would be able to access both textbook and workbooks. However, only some of the university institutions were met with the agency and executions, but the same did not apply to basic education. I, for one, can attest to that. I am the student at the University of South Africa. We've never received any laptop or tablet or any communication between their students and the institution regarding the distribution of laptops. So it is, I'm just a lion when it comes to government dragging feet and turning a blind eye when it comes to our needs as young people, and we are the future. They must actually provide us with resources so we can help ourselves. Before I become even more lioness, let me step down. Thank you so much, team. Thank you so much to Saya and to Josoro for the opportunity. As young people, my team and I am really grateful for the opportunity that we were able to take part in this amazing initiative. Thank you so much.
So much. We really appreciate your intervention, and we also really appreciate you keeping to time. Next up, we'll have, for speaking about peace and security, Kagiso Sekgage. Can I please remind people that if you aren't speaking, please put your microphones on mute. So we have Kagiso Sekgage next. Thank you.
This is true.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Please confirm if I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. May I also, as I introduce myself, also introduce my co-team leader, who is Anita Dwaba. I'll be speaking on crime and violence, gender-based violence, migration and human xenophobia and human trafficking. And she will be speaking on constitutionalism, human rights, corruption, and state capture. The solution we have for crime and violence is that there should be an improvement and idleness, because the problem we have is that there's a lack of socio-economic development, which leads to youth being perpetrators and recipients of crime and violence. And other issues that contribute to crime and violence include service delivery, youth unemployment, and poverty. We also acknowledge the existing policies and programs such as the NYDA and the NDP 2030. The solution we have for gender-based violence is that there should be more investment in resources that the government should equip and train civil servants to better make up our institutions. They should encourage public participation in questioning laws. Gender-based violence content should be included in curriculum, such as life orientations, because there's a lack of awareness around gender-based violence. The problems we have when it comes to protective and rehabilitation system policies and institutions to mitigate the gender-based violence. There's also a lack of education and awareness around the subject of gender-based violence. There's also a lack of participation when it comes to issues of gender-based violence. For example, when we were dealing with this in this group of peace and security, we only had females participating in this group, and the males were not present with us to participate with us in this, and that could have helped to understand and increase the knowledge of social lives. We'll also see an effective rehabilitation and support. We suggest that there should be a fully implemented South African development regional data collection. There's no data that's available that includes or that creates awareness around human trafficking. There should also be the creation of safe space. We also suggest that they should provide support for victims in the form of human trafficking centers. We don't have any, or we're not aware of any human trafficking center that's available. We should also build guaranteed protection, such as witness protection, issues of human trafficking in our school curriculum. Because the problem is that when it comes to human trafficking, the issues are complex and they are interlinked, and they include social and economic and political factors, such as one, there's a lack of effective border control systems There's ineffective response to human trafficking syndicates. Poverty and drug addiction are also some of the factors that lead to human trafficking. On the issue of migration and xenophobia, we suggest, or we bring the solution that we should dismantle the system of detention centers as they are not effective, rather promote deportation of illegal foreign nationals. We should extend asylum seekers' permit validity a year to alleviate the challenges and to increase visibility and access for people in need of the exchange programs. Because the problems with migration and xenophobia stem from the ineffective border controls, illegal mining, lack of education on migration and globalization, and corruption within the formal and informal ports of entry. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Anita Dwaba to speak more on constitutionalism, and thank you.
Thank you, Kagiso. Hi, everyone. I'm Anita Dwaba, and I am.
Sorry, could I just I put a little interjection before you start, Anita. Kagiso, would it be possible, because we had some trouble hearing you on our side, if you could just type out the 3 key points that you raised in your argument? So we heard a number of points, but a little bit, I guess, disintegrated by the internet. So if you could just type in the 3 points. And Anita, if you could please keep it to 3 minutes, that would be excellent.
I'll try. Thank you. So for our group, we were focusing on constitutionalism and human rights and corruption and state capture. So what we decided to do was to separate these topics. So we grouped constitutionalism and human rights as one topic, and we treated corruption and state capture as one topic. So focusing on constitutionalism and human rights, our problem statement was that there's a lack of access to efficient and effective justice systems, which hinders adequate access to human rights and the realization of the principle of constitutionalism. We also noted that there's a lack of adequate civic education on the interpretation of human rights and constitutional obligations of government. So for our evidence, what we used was, we used multiple sources. We used reports and research, and we also used our knowledge, our grassroots knowledge around the issue. So we used Stats SA, we used the National Prosecuting Authority's reports, we used reports from the Human Rights Watch, and we used reports from the South African Human Rights Commission. And we used what we are seeing on the streets, such as increased civil protests, and as well as increased reports in media on human rights violations. For our policies, what we used was the integrated development plan. We used the National Development Policy and the National Youth Policy and other socioeconomic policies such as the RDP policy and the grant policy. So for our recommendations for this topic, we highlighted most importantly that issues around human rights should be included in the curriculum in basic education, and that there should be more campaigns and educational programs and workshops in disadvantaged communities, most particularly to increase awareness on human rights, and as well as what to do when you find that your human right has been infringed, because we found that a lot of people sometimes know their human rights, and sometimes know that the action was unfair, but they don't know where to go or what to do to report or to challenge the matter. So going into corruption and state capture, our problem statement was that South Africa's government system is highly consumed by corruption, and this highly impacts socioeconomic infrastructure and therefore widens the trust deficit between government and citizens. And we also noted that as corruption soars, there's minimal accountability for corrupt officials. So for our evidence on this part, we used, again, the same methods we used for the previous topic. We used both research and reports, and we also used what we are seeing on the ground. So we used the recent Hawks reports, we used the establishment of the Zondo Commission, we used the increasing legal actions against municipalities, citing maladministration and corruption, and we used the state capture report published by the public prosecutor, and we are also seeing a lot of media reports on corruption, into both international and local media reporting on corruption in South Africa. So for our policies, We used the National Development Plan. We used the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, and we used the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. And for our recommendation, like the other recommendation, like the first recommendation, we focused a lot on awareness. So we focused on whistleblowing and just raising awareness around corruption, because we've also found that people are now desensitized around corruption, and we're seeing it, we are starting to normalize it as something that is part of South African society, which should not be the case. And we should try to sort of dismantle that or try to not normalize that that problem. So yeah, that was our presentation for subgroup 2.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anita. We really appreciated that. And now we'd like to hear from the team on climate change. We have Tyler Booth speaking.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So I'm speaking on behalf of our team lead, Didaboko, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So I was one of the members in the climate change group. So some of the key things, or our process was, obviously we got together, we worked on the document, we looked at the questions that were provided to us, and then we kind of separated into a few key groups. So the first one was social justice. Another one was environmental education. The third was biodiversity loss. And then the fourth was circular economy. So that's the lenses that we looked at climate change under in our process. And we all agreed that in terms of climate change and climate action, we realized that the future we want as young people is going to be green, intersectional, and it's going to be just. So with those three things in mind, we kind of started with our research, our background, and started moving towards our recommendations with a lot of overlapping things. And to note that the people in our group come from a lot of different networks and backgrounds and experiences, and specifically several are actually in education and tertiary education, studying environmental sciences and that sort of stuff. And then others have actually participated in conferences like the Conference of the Party, the UNFCCC one. So we have quite a diverse, well-experienced climate change group that are well-versed in the policies and the state of climate change in the country. So with that, we really felt that initially when the groups were being decided that climate change, as climate activists, we really needed climate change to be represented in the African peer review mechanism. Specifically we realize how climate change is going to exacerbate the effects that we've seen everywhere else. So if we're talking about the recent cyclone Eloise in the time of COVID, the impacts that it's had, the knock-on impacts it's had on every other sector that I've heard mentioned today and every other grouping we've heard today are unimaginable. And that's just one event. And that's mainly focused if we're looking at our neighbor in Mozambique and some northern parts of South Africa. So we realize that climate change is going to affect land. It's going to affect land and housing. Our land and houses going to be destroyed in big climate change events. Then we have health and social services. So if we're looking at the major events in the times of COVID, the way we're able to deliver services to these people is very segmented and not adequate to actually prepare us for this eventual future. They're also looking at the economic challenges and actually having to rebuild and address these sort of challenges. So there's a lot of overlaps in the things climate change is going to affect and is currently affecting. So we really felt that our solutions needed to embody what's happening now and what our future will actually look like. So there's a whole bunch of recommendations that you're seeing on the screen, but when we looked at it from 5 key areas. So the first was policy implementation and public participation. The second was public-private partnership and collaboration. The third was accountability in the sense of government accountability, but then also private sector accountability and fostering good relationships in that essence. Then we found that education and awareness on the topic of climate change and climate curriculum is very necessary to actually equip people to handle with this complex topic. I mean, if we're looking at the jobs of the future, a lot of them are changing. What kids are learning right now is going to be very different from what's actually applicable to them in their future career. And we're looking at 20 to 30 years down the line for these kinds of kids that they are entering the job market then. So we need an adjusted curriculum that's going to look at climate change, but obviously we need a curriculum that's going to prepare people for this eventual future. Hopefully not the eventual future, hopefully we do enough now to address it, but kind of getting people there. And then the last point is creating employment. So although it's a very difficult challenge and we know the great impacts it's going to have, we also need to kind of see the light in it and kind of make opportunities and make value in terms of waste management and services and that will deal with the climate change impacts, so that people in the effects that we're going to see, they're still prepared and can still make a living and sustain their livelihood. We also wanted to note that we're very keen on the idea of social justice underpinning all the implementation of policies. That's something we felt really key to everything we as climate activists ask for. So we'd really like to see that a bit more reflected as well in the recommendations, even with the first comment. And then one final thing, we believe we're going to edit it, suggest the edit is that it should be local communities and youth should be consulted. Instead of youth activists, we believe all young people should actually be consulted in terms of climate change policies and the way they envision their future. So that's it from the climate change team, and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Tyler. That was amazing. And thank you so much to all of the other presenters. You've really given us a rich food for the basis of our discussion. As the moderator for the session, there were a couple of things that stood out to me in terms of the similarities across the section. So one was the need for awareness as well as equitable provision of resources across the board. So when it came to education, that seemed to be a really big challenge, that the government needs to be more accountable and equitable in the way that they're dealing with the challenge that we have from an infrastructure perspective, from a digital perspective. In peace and security, it came through that education and awareness was a major issue around gender-based violence, as well as around constitutional democracy and what does it mean to be an active citizen in terms of what are your rights and your responsibilities in that context. So education and awareness becomes another big footprint there. And in climate change, I loved what you said about that the future should be green, intersectional, and just how much it's going to affect everything. Well, I guess how much it affects the things that are happening now and just how much that impact will be amplified over the next couple of years. And so now I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask the teams? The floor is yours.
Madam Chair, just to point out that we do have a couple of interventions in the chat box.
Okay. Okay, so the question that comes, thank you so much, Luanda, for bringing that up. So the question that came from the chat box is, to Dikeledi and the team, is there a link within the presentation that shows the data on enrollment in primary, secondary, and tertiary institutions over the past 5 years? Do existing education policies acknowledge the need to address the concerns that young people have around access to quality education, just to mention a few? And then, I think, okay. So another need that was pointed out was the need to improve existing social service touchpoints, make it easier for people to receive assistance in eventual climate change related disasters. From the climate change team, is that something that you think would work in what your research came up with? And yeah, I think those would be the first two questions. Oh, and we have a live question from Sibusiswe. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for that. I think mine is an overall question for everyone and the researchers specifically. Now, just based on the presentation by the team on peace and security, they mentioned the fact that their group was all female. And for example, I know with my group, we had probably 3 males or something like that, but it was dominantly female. So out of interest overall in the consultation, what did the ratio of, male versus female look like in terms of representation? I think that would also be interesting to see overall where the information was coming from, and is it based on how the call was put out? Just, out of interest.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from Tafadzwa where we'll stop so we can let the panelists come through. So Tafadzwa, please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Chipo. Many thanks once again to the presenters of the last session. I just wanted to seek clarity from the Justice and Human Rights cluster on whether they were specific around the participation of youth with disabilities within the constitutional agenda. Were there any issues relating to whether they have got access to policies that are youth-friendly, that also addresses the young people with visibility issues? So it would be good to hear from the speaker, but also to get more insights on whether there are issues relating to young, for those who would want to advocate for their socioeconomic rights. This is in comparison with the Zimbabwean context. So I wanted to find out that has South Africa reached those levels where
Tafadzwa, it seems to keep cutting out just as you're giving us like the crux of your question. Would you mind repeating it again?
Okay, I'll just try to be as brief as I can. It would be good just to find out whether youth with disabilities were addressed, were there issues addressed in the class on constitution and justice, and also in relation to the violation of young people who are involved in protest. Thank you, Chipo. Over to you.
I need to unmute myself. Thank you so much. And I take these questions back to the speakers. Please feel free to answer the ones that feel most pertinent to what you were discussing.
Okay. From access to education, I had the question. Yes, looking into the constitution, like I said, from section 29, it takes to the right of basic education with no limits and bounds. So yes, there are policies around that. And in 2017, the 98% of the students between the age 7 to 17 were enrolled, which is the highest the country has seen. Although the Fees Must Fall campaign, the enrollment of tertiary education has been upgraded to 6% from 4%, which is not, much, but a step in the right direction, especially now that there has been a funding opportunity on the rise for students that come from disadvantaged background. So yes, there is progress, even though it's not it's not much, but slowly but surely we are getting there. They're working on it. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Excellent, thank you so much. And then maybe let me help it out. Kagiso and Anita, if you could refer to the questions on security and constitutionalism.
Yes, thank you. So for that question, I didn't get the second question, but in terms of people living with disabilities, so in our submission, what we did was we sort of put everyone in a sort of the same bandwagon as disadvantaged and marginalized communities. So that included people living with disabilities. So when we're saying that there should be more campaigns and more awareness, it's not just Black communities or colored communities, it's also including other marginalized groups such as the LGBTQI++ community, as well as people living with disabilities as well. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome, thank you. And I think the secondary question was in terms of if I understand this correctly, Tafadzwa, in terms of like youth who are protesters and being actively engaged, sort of like in protest activity, what's the framing in the South African context and what's the support that there is from a social justice perspective? If I captured you correctly, Tafadzwa.
Well, that's a difficult one because I don't think it's something we touched on. I'm not sure whether any of my members from my group might want to like tackle this question.
Well, I mean, well, I thank you so much, Anita, for trying. And I think that it's a good question that maybe we can like keep a little bit more alive in the chat group, or if there is somebody else who feels like they have a good understanding or answer to that, you can just raise your hand and we can pick on you.
Can I answer the question on male representation in our group?
Yes, please.
The most interesting thing about this is that when we were submerged into different groups, we had to volunteer ourselves where we want to fall under. And it just happened that when we found ourselves in the group, we found ourselves as females only, and we only realized that. And I think it's more interesting because it asks the question of why is it that peace and security seem to be more of an issue for female than it is for men. And it brings in the question also the interest of raising awareness in across gender mainstreams. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you're raising quite an interesting point, because traditionally peace and security were actually seen as quite male-dominated areas. But now that we're bringing in a more sustainable or holistic peace that integrates issues like gender-based violence, it's interesting how that profile is changing. Tyler, could you tell us about the climate change group and what your profile looked like? And then I'll go over to Luanda.
Are you talking about the profile of like the group, who's in the group?
The gender profile. Did you guys find the same challenges in terms of gender representation?
No, so we had quite a good balance. I think it was probably 60% female, 40% male. So there was quite a good gender balance, racial balance. Different parts of the country, we had quite a decent balance in terms of our working group.
Awesome, that's great to hear. And Luanda, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you so much, Chipo, for the recognition. I just wanted to ask Tafatswa, given that that was such a good question, to maybe phrase it in the chat box by way of recommendation, so that our groups and Kaylee Clifford, who's going to be finalizing this draft, can actually take it into consideration when we do the edits and revision of the submission. Thank you. Chipo, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I always find this such a challenge. Is there anybody else who has any more questions for any of the groups, either in education, peace and security, or on climate change? Okay, well, if that's the case, then I think I will be handing over back to Luanda, and we seem to have turned ourselves some time. Luanda, I think it's back to you.
Thank you very much. I think we are now approaching the very, very final segment of our program today. And to assist Steve with this, I'm just going to be sharing my screen for the Mentimeter. And Steve, please, can you just take us through this next segment before the closing and the vote of thanks?
Sure. Thank you very much, Luanda and Chipo, for that session. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to just put on my video because I prefer it to do so. Thank you very, very much. So you'll see on the screen at the moment a Mentimeter poll. Please go on your cell phone to menti.com, and then it's going to ask you for a code, and that code is on the screen at the moment, 8790681, and then it's going to ask you what 3 areas still need to be addressed in the report, and then it'll form. You'll see what will happen as it forms. Just to say, I've been absolutely blown away by what you guys have produced. We had, I thought we were taking a risk only doing a youth submission, but it is of such high quality that it could have been done by universities or very old professors, but it has a very nice youthful tone. So just to say well done and thank you. The enthusiasm with which you got involved, the enthusiasm of the presenters was really, really great. So and it's so wonderful to see a project coming together through the hard work of many people. Just to tell you what happens now. So from this point, Kaylee will make corrections to the manuscript. So I was one of the people who edited it online. I know that Tessa said it's best if you don't edit it online because it's going to be too messy. But I'm going to ask, when I'm finished, give Kaylee a couple of minutes just to say what's from her perspective. My sense is that we didn't really identify too many sections that were badly written or missing information or corrections that had to be made. I think it sounds to me from the conversation today that we are probably 90% there. So Kaylee will just come on and just give us an idea of how long it will take her. Then, I mean, it's not a short document, as you know, any of you have read it. It's 83 pages at the moment, and by the time we've put everything into the front, it may well be an even longer document. And that puts a bit of pressure on my publications department, because we've done a similar exercise in Botswana, and they had 12 issues on their in their report. You guys have only got 9, so that was already like another 30 pages longer. But it was over 25,000 words, and it goes through a language edit, and so that takes time. So from this point, we are now at the end of February. I'm hoping that if Kaylee can turn it around in, say, a week, I can then feed it into the editing process, and that would probably take about 4 or 5 weeks, I would imagine, maybe shorter if we push them. It'll then go back to Kaylee for final corrections, and then it goes to our layout person. It gets nicely laid out, and we'll do something incorporating the colors of the South African flag as the motif. We've done something similar for Botswana. It looks really great. And then we are going to be launching the report. And I'm also going to turn over to Tessa, who can take us through some of the ideas that she has on what's now. We do have a bit of funding available to do things like infographics and other things, maybe small meetings if that's going to be possible. But Tessa can just give some outline. I don't feel equipped to talk about it because it's her baby, and 2, I only had a brief look at it recently. So Tess, I think, can go to what some of our ideas and plans are for getting this report out. But I was listening carefully to our government speaker, Dr. Patrick Sokela, and also to Lani Tafuta from the National Governing Council. And if I heard correctly, I heard an invitation for us as a team to make a presentation to both the government structures and the National Governing Council. And I think that's a very great offer, and I think we should absolutely take it up, even before the document is 100% finalized. I mean, I think the standard of the presentations that we heard today, I would have no hesitation in putting you in front of a government minister or even President Ramaphosa. So well done, guys. Before handing over to Kaylee, I'm just going to do the thank yous now, and then I'll hand to Kaylee and then to Tessa. So firstly, I want to thank Helena Badegard, who is at the Swedish Embassy in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. She really believed in this project. She fought for us to have the funding for this project for the 3 countries that we're doing this year, and they have supported us really generously. So a big thank you to the Swedish government and to SIDA. Then on my team, I really have to thank Luanda, who always steps in when it's needed. She keeps me on an even keel. She corrects me when I make mistakes. She's been very passionate and enthusiastic about this project and has really thrown herself into it. So Lou, thank you very, very much. Also a new member of our team, Kaniso, who's just joined us as a CAS intern or scholar. He's going to be, he's taken notes, and we're going to do a little workshop report, so thank you for that. Also, thank you to Nikki and Spiwe from our events department, our communications department, who created a mini Twitter campaign. I wonder if any of you saw it yesterday. You've probably been inundated by me with trying to spread the word. But I think it helped, because at one point we had about 75 people, maybe just short of 75 people on the call. So that was really a nice experiment from our communications department. And as I think I mentioned earlier, we're having a Zimbabwe workshop on Friday, and we'll tweak the way we went with that Twitter and Facebook campaign. So we've learned some lessons there. Then also, as always, to thank Sarasa and Dumi from our events department for putting on these amazing shows, because each one of them is a production, each one of them is a mini TV program. So thanks, guys, for that. I'd like to also thank Tessa and Toby from Jasoro. They've been great partners to work with. They haven't just been silent partners. They've pushed us, we've pushed them. They did. It's been really great in the ideas and the fresh perspectives and so forth. So to Tessa and to Toby, thank you very, very much. And then also just a last thank you. Luanda will remind me if I've left anybody out, but I just want to thank SIA, the South African Institute for International Affairs, for believing in the APRM, for continuing to back my belief in the APRM, and that it has great potential, and that we should still be working in this area, and for giving us the space and the framework to do that. So thank you, Noema, for that. Okay, I think those are all the thank yous.
Maybe just to thank Kaylee and Chipo. I don't know if I mentioned it.
I didn't have them on my list, but yes, a special thank you also to Kaylee Clifford, who has put the final document together over many months, and also to Chipo for the outstanding background research, the facts and figures, the 175 footnotes. So thank you, thanks both of you. Thanks, Lou, for the reminder. Okay. I'd like to ask Kaylee just to say a few words about what's going to physically happen with the document now and what she might need. Kaylee?
Sure, thanks, Stephen, and thanks as well to everyone who presented today. It was really clear to me already when I was compiling the report that a lot of hard work and thought had gone into the submission, and your comments today are really going to help strengthen the document. So I will spend the next week just incorporating some of the things that we've discussed here today. And I think at the end of the process, we're going to have a really solid document that you can all be really, really proud of. I will drop my email address in the chat box. If anyone wasn't able to mention something that they thought was missing or think something else should be included, please feel free to get in touch with me and we can go from there. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Kelly. So yeah, please email her. And Tess, I'll turn over to you.
Hi. Sorry. So yeah, mine will be very short. Just again to thank everybody, but also just to say that based on the request that we had last year in our interaction, we will be doing a bit more than just a launch. And so please be looking out for some activities around the launch. There'll be a pre-launch set of engagements, and we're going to ask that the groups avail yourselves, particularly on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, to help get the word out about the launch and some of the issues that have been raised. We want to do some infographics around that, so we're going to really need your participation in that regard. And then also just, we spoke about capacity building, and so we're in conversation with different stakeholders at the moment to host some capacity building and training engagements and webinars. So that's another opportunity that we'll be looking forward to as we go forward. But the final part of this is also engaging once the completed South Africa APRM document exists. And when that document is ready and available and the government is ready to submit it to the APRM, we really want to engage with that document and make sure that the inputs that we've made find expression in that document, and that we can speak to the authors of that document and make sure that we get as much understanding about what drove the final and complete South Africa APRM in this round, given that we've put in so much work and effort. And I want to thank everybody again for the efforts that you've put in today. Your presentations just showed how much commitment you've shown to this process. But please be looking forward to some of the pre-launch engagement on social media, some of the capacity building workshops that we're going to be hosting, particularly around advocacy and lobbying. And then finally, when the report does come out, some work that we want to do with you so that we can lobby government around what's in the final document. I think that sums up where we're heading to.
Steve, you're muted.
Sorry, so many screens open. Thanks very much, Tessa. And I think that's about it from us. So I think we will allow people maybe a couple of minutes to still type comments if they want to into the chat box. Give us your thoughts on how this event went. If you have praise or if you have constructive criticism, that's great. So we'll leave it open until 1 o'clock, so you've got a bit of time to chat.
Steve, if I may, I just want to maybe just note some of the responses that we're getting on the Mentimeter. You know, we asking what areas still need to be addressed, and I'm seeing a lot of interesting notes pulling through, such as concrete recommendations, higher education crisis, youth exploitation, clear baselines, neoliberal frameworks, building on existing information, youth participation, social cohesion, regional integration. I think we're seeing a lot of these coming up, and I'd like to invite people to please take up Kaylee's offer, to just send her an email on the email address she's going to drop in the chat box to give more concrete, more longer sentences on what you mean by this, and it will be incorporated if possible into the final draft. And a final thing I'd like to just note is that there was a request in the bigger WhatsApp group for the launch event to be a physical meeting, which I think is a bit of a challenge at the moment, because we really do want to prioritize everybody's health and make sure that everybody's safe. So we did note that request and we may discuss it, but at this point, I do think that we may just want to prioritize the safety of everybody, and bringing everybody into one physical room may be a bit of a challenge, but we note the request. And with that, on my side, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation and really for going into this journey with us. We've come a long way since October last year, and we've made incredible progress. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luanda. Yeah, great to look at this word cloud, and absolutely. So we're going to leave it open. We'll leave it's now 11:53. We'll leave the chat open if anybody has any final comments. But just to once again say, this was really a very stimulating and challenging exercise. The fact that we've done this whole project online, I think, is also amazing, and we will look into what's possible at launch time. But the journey continues. So thanks very much, guys. If I can just ask the team to just stay on as well, and then we'll start chatting when everybody leaves at 1. Thanks.